Optimo- Optimism Bias, Chapter 4. What do Barack Obama and Shirley Temple have in common when private optimism meets public despair? A wave of optimism sweeps the nation. Read the headlines, and sweep it did. Surveys reported 80% of Americans were optimistic about the next 4 years. 63% were confident that their personal financial situation would improve. 71% believed that the economy would get better, and 51% said that they thought the employment rate would drop. Optimism was everywhere, and it did not remain in the land of the free. Soon enough, hope reached the Spanish, Italians, Germans, French, and even the cynical Brits. From the United States and Europe, optimism steadily crossed over oceans, reaching India, Indonesia, Japan, Mexico, Nigeria, Russia, Turkey, Chile, China, Egypt, and Ghana, where surveys reported people were the most optimistic of all. Of the 17,000 people polled by the BBC and GlobeScan Incorporated, 3 out of 4 respondents expected positive change. A majority of 15 out of 17 countries, from East Asia, Latin America, and West Africa to the Islamic world, agreed that the near future would be, well, rosy. What prompted such encompassing, unshakable hope? When were these glorious times? What times in human history would produce optimism in 80% of people in a nation of almost 304 million, and proceed to encourage people around the globe? Take a wild guess. It was during the bull market of the 1990s when the U.S. market and many other global financial markets rose rapidly. Was it just after the fall of the Berlin Wall, when democracy seemed to have taken over and the internet became accessible to people around the world? Did widespread optimism and joy follow the end of World War II, bringing a sense of relief to millions of people around the world? Or did hope climax following the moon landing in 1969, when humans felt like they had at long last conquered the world? The answer is no, 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 and no, and no. Optimism did not sweep the world in an unprecedented manner during the times of financial stability, economical growth, scientific and technological developments, achievements, or world peace. No, optimism rocketed during the period of which we are in deep global recession. The United States in particular was facing extremely challenging times. Maybe it was because one of the worst periods in economic history, second to only the Great Depression in the early 1930s. In addition, the War on Terror was in full swing, and many American soldiers were fighting in Iraq. It was late in 2008 when optimism peaked, and an upbeat view was adopted by people around the world. You may have already guessed what triggered hope in the American people during those dreary times. I was a 47-year-old born in Hawaii. Father of 2, authority of the audacity of hope, Barack Obama, the first African-American U.S. president. How could one person inspire so many to become so hopeful? Significantly, not only about their personal future, which we now know is a fundamental to human nature, but hopeful for the future of a nation, the future of the world, which I will later argue is quite rare. David Gardner was one of the many journalists who went out on the street looking for answers. He asked people why they thought Obama had managed to fill the country with hope. He brings a different set of values, a different viewpoint to Washington, with the White House in particular, that we haven't seen in a while, in the last 8 years, said one woman. Another respondent attributed the nation's optimism to Obama's openness to other ideas, his willingness to take advice from others. Indeed, Obama's manifesto was built on change. As the first African-American president, he represented progress, and not only for minorities. His ideology and plans for the nation promised developments that would lead to increased financial equality, market stability, better international relations, and more. All of this together with his trustworthy demeanor, which was perceived by many to be stark contrast to the demeanor of his predecessor. "He's not Bush," said one, could have led to the optimistic expectations of the people. That was not the whole story, though. Would the people have been so helpful, so optimistic, if the United States had not been in the midst of one of the worst financial crises it had ever known? Would the people of Egypt, China, Russia, and Ghana all would have believed wholeheartedly that better things were just around the corner if hundreds of people had not been killed daily in military action? Ironically, the answer is no. As one interviewee put it, Obama cannot succeed. He has to succeed because the world really depends on him right now. High expectations regarding a new president are not limited to unstable times. Following the 2000 elections, 49% of Americans believed George W. Bush would be above average president. By the end of his first term, only 25% said he was. When Tony Blair was elected Britain's Prime Minister, 60% of UK citizens believed the country was getting better. This figure fell to 40% by the time he left 10 Downing Street. We may learn in the years to come that Obama was indeed worthy of the faith bestowed upon him. The fact, however, is that the people's urgent need for good news most likely drove positive expectations well above the baseline. It is during hard times that people rely on optimism the most. When the going gets tough, we desperately start searching for the silver lining, and Barack Obama was providing just that. In his inauguration speech, he fully acknowledged the challenging times. That we are in the midst of a crisis now well understood. Our nation's at war against a far-reaching network of violence and hatred. Our economy is badly weakened. Our homes have been lost. Jobs shed, businesses shuttered. Our health care is too costly. Our schools fail too many, and each day brings further evidence that we use energy, strengthen our adversaries, and threaten our planet. However, in addition to the present hardships, he described what he believed would be a promising future. The road ahead will be long. Our climb will be steep. We may not get there in 1 year or even in one term, but America, I have never been more hopeful that I am tonight that we will get there. America can change. Our union will be perfected, and what we already have achieved gives us hope for what we can and must achieve tomorrow. Putting our trust in hope. If you were one of the millions around the world listening to Obama's victory speech on TV, on the radio, online, or in person, try to go back to that moment. How would you describe your emotional reaction? What was your feelings? A feeling of spreading liquid warmth in the chest and a lump in the throat was how a student in the University of California, Berkeley, expressed his reaction. Does this come close? Scientists at Berkeley called this feeling elevation. Jonathan Haidt. Okay, there we go, close enough. A psychologist. Okay. At the University of Virginia, who studies the feeling of elevation, describes such instances as erasing cynicism and generating hope and optimism. He has proposed a specific psychological mechanism that may underlie moments of elevation. According to Haidt, such occurrences stimulate the vagus nerve, which in turn triggers the release of oxytocin. The vagus nerve is one of the 12 cranial nerves. Its core starts in the brainstem, which is an evolutionary old part of the brain that plays a key role in regulating the vital functions. The nerve extends all the way down to the brainstem, through the neck, to the chest and the abdomen. It conveys sensory information to the brain that reflects the body's internal state, as well as sends information from the brain to the rest of the body. Haid suggests that stimulation of the vagus nerve by the events that generate elevation causes the release of oxytocin. Think about the last time you hugged someone, held a baby, petted a dog, or had sex. In all those instances, oxytocin was being released in your body. Oxytocin is produced by the hypothalamus, a structure in the base of the brain that produces neurohormones, and stored in the pituitary, which is situated just beneath the hypothalamus, and secretes hormones. When triggered, oxytocin is discharged into the bloodstream, and is also binds to the receptor in the brain, particularly to the regions involved in emotional and social processing. High levels of oxytocin reduce our uncertainty about social stimuli. A smile will be interpreted with more confidence as a positive signal, thereby reducing social anxiety and promoting approach behavior. In one brain imaging study, volunteers were administered oxytocin before viewing faces conveying different emotional expressions. After the administration of oxytocin, the participants had less difficulty interpreting the expressions. As a result, less activity was observed in the amygdala, which is normally engaged in processing social signals, especially ambiguous ones. Reduced social stress and uncertainty, along with increase in approach behavior, should have enhanced trust among individuals. Can administration of oxytocin therefore make people more trusting of strangers? To test this, scientists turned to their favorite method for investigating trust, a game known as, well, the trust game. Two participants play the game. One is designated investigator and the other is the trustee. Let's say average Joe is the investigator and B. Madoff is the trustee. Both Joe and Madoff are endowed with initial sum of money, $20. Joe, as the investor, can send money to Madoff, the trustee. Let us say Joe decides to send Madoff $5. When Joe gives Madoff the money, the experimenter triples the amount, so now Madoff gets $15. Madoff can then decide to keep all the money, in which case poor Joe just lost $5, or he can send a certain amount back to Joe. A fair move on Madoff's part would be to send back more than $5, maybe $7. Joe has to sit back and trust Madoff's sense of fairness. When the game is played in the lab, scientists find that Joes often choose to trust the Madoffs with their money. The interesting bit is when you squirt oxytocin into Joe's nose, he becomes more likely to trust Madoff with his money. He shouldn't. Madoff does not reciprocate the sending of great amounts back. Did Obama's public speaking trigger oxytocin release in the listeners, given the overwhelming trust bestowed upon him? I would not be surprised if oxytocin levels were indeed heightened in the crowd. People trusted Obama. Obama was promising a better future, and so people put their faith and hope. Well, during the first decade of the 21st century, American people turned to their first African American president for hope. In the third decade of the previous century, they turned to a less likely source, a little girl with golden curls, a cheerful voice, and a reassuring baby face. Her name was Shirley Temple. Shirley Temple was a famous child actress, appearing in numerous films during the 1930s. Her uplifting movies, in which she often sings and dances, made more money at the box office than any other star of her time. All this at the height of the Great Depression. The Great Depression originated in the United States during an abrupt collapse of the stock market in 1929, then evolved into a worldwide economic crisis affecting cities all around the world. Personal income fell drastically in the United States. 13 million people joined the ranks of the unemployed, and 5,000 banks went out of business. Just as in the credit crunch that would hit almost 80 years later, people sought something to alleviate their spirits. Into the void came Shirley. Like Barack Obama's speeches, Shirley Temple's filmed mirrored a difficult era which at the same time promised a better future time promising a better future. Her movies offered a sense that better times were just around the corner, the title of a popular film she made back in 1938, and that we would all just stand up and cheer, the title of a film she made in 1934. The fundamental premiere of Shirley's movies was everything that would be okay as long as everyone worked in union and cared for one another. Sound familiar? It is the kindness to take a stranger when the levels break, the selflessness of workers who would rather cut their own hours than see a friend lose their job, which sees us through our darkest hours. Those values upon our success, honesty and hard work, courage and fair play, those things are old, akin to Obama's optimistic message, temples registered with the people, so much as Franklin Roosevelt, who was their president at the time, said, as long as our country has Shirley Temple, we will be all right. Talk about our optimism. Global pessimism. The reliance on optimism during the Great Depression as well as during the recession in 2008 is intriguing not only because of the stark contrast between the difficulties of the times and the hope of the people, but also because of public optimism is relatively rare. While private optimism, positive expectations regarding our own future is commonplace, it is typically accompanied by public despair, negative expectations regarding the future of our country. Statistics such as those conveyed people's optimism about the country in 2008. 71% believed that the economy would get better in the upcoming year. In the political situation, 3 out of 4 respondents expected positive change in the international relations are not frequently observed during stable times. When public optimism is observed, it is usually short-lived, such as the hope of being alleviated shortly after elections. More than not, people expect to do better personally in the near future while anticipating that the rest of the country will go down in the drain. For example, a few months before the financial collapse of 2008, the majority of British people said that they thought the condition of the country was getting worse. They would soon discover they were correct. At the very same time, they were expecting their personal circumstances in the coming years to improve. Many of them would find that they were wrong. 93% they were optimistic about the future of their own family, but only 17% were optimistic about the future of other families. That year, most people expressed satisfaction with their personal experience with Great Britain National Healthcare Services, NHS. Also, 80% were satisfied with their last visit to the hospital, and 65% said their local NHS was doing a good job. However, as it came time, a majority of respondents said the NHS was in crisis, and less than 50% said the NHS was offering good service nationally. It was not only the National Health Service that the British were pessimistic about, but they were not so positive about the prospect of the government controlling crime and violence either. The vast majority, 83%, believed that the violence was rising in the United Kingdom. In reality, crime had just been going down steadily for nearly a decade. This was particularly because of the national spending on crime prevention was rising. Nevertheless, people's confidence in the government's ability to stop crime went down from 63% in 1997 to 27% in 2007. Crime seemed to be a major concern for citizens. More than half of the respondents rated crime as one of the 3 most worrying issues in Great Britain. Citizens, on the of other countries did not seem so worried. Only 23% of Spaniards and 35% of Americans listed crime as one of the 3 most troubling issues in their country. Did the Brits have a special reason to be concerned? Should they all have moved to the United States? Maybe, but crime should not have been their reason. Let's take a look at the homicide rates in countries around the world. Below are the most recent figures for homicide rates per 100,000 population in the countries listed. El Salvador, 71. Guatemala, 52. Colombia, 35. Brazil, 22. Mexico, 15. Note: Some of the homicide rates below include attempts and do not. This limits comparison between countries. Those rates exclude attempts that have been starred. Russia 15, Thailand 5.9, United States 5, France 1.31, Australia 1.3, United Kingdom 1.28, Italy 1.1, United Arab Emirates 0.92, Japan 0.5. In other words, if a bird decides to pack his things and move to France or even Australia, he's more likely to end up a victim of homicide. While countries in South America and Central America had the list of places with high crime rates, Italy, which is known for its mafia, seems fairly peaceful, although the United Kingdom is not doing as well as Italy. Homicide rates are still relatively low. Granted, homicide is only one type of violent act, but it is not a bad indicator of general crime rates. It seems the British might be overestimating the extent to which crime is a problem. Does that mean that overestimate of their own likelihood being a victim of crime? If acts of crime are the only top 3 disturbing issues in the United Kingdom, and people believe the ability to stop it all is decreasing, does it not follow that one should be quite worried regarding one's own safety? My student Christoph Korn and I decided to investigate. We gathered data regarding the probability of falling victim to different crimes. Then asked Londoners to estimate their likelihood of encountering such incidents in order to see if they were on the mark. The experiment, which we conducted in our lab in central London, indicated that people slightly underestimated the probability of being victims of crime. When asked to estimate the likelihood of different adverse events happening to them in their lifetime, such as having a car stolen, being mugged, having their apartment burglared, and other traumatic events, people have estimated they were on average a bit lower than the figures published by the authorities. This, while people believing crime rates are high, they also believe they are somehow immune. While the economy of the country is in trouble, we believe that we will endure. While health services are poor, and public schools are even worse, our local services and local schools are fortunately quite good. Organized by the Royal Society of Arts in 2008, politicians, academics, and polling experts came together to discuss the contradiction between private optimism and public despair. At the end of the session, a man in the audience raised his hand and said, "I do not see what the big fuss is about. It is true, the polls are right. National Health Services is a mess and in general provide poor service. However, in my own branch, is indeed excellent."